Hello, guys, and welcome back to the Racing Minds podcast. This weekend, we're going to discuss about the Las Vegas Grand Prix. It had everything, starting from World Championship victories, amazing race victories, teammate dramas. It's quite an eventful one. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and let's review the weekend in detail. Starting with the qualifying, a few things which really caught my eye was starting with Pierre Gasly, P3. I mean, that car, I wasn't expecting it to be even going into Q3 to begin with. I was expecting them somewhere to be down out in Q1, at best maybe Q2, but Pierre Gasly has been putting that car in places where it doesn't deserve to be. Huge props to Pierre Gasly for that. And on the other end of things, once again, we're going to talk about Sergio Perez. I mean, he was out in Q1 right away with no major mistakes, not a deleted lap time or anything. At this point, he is single-handedly costing Red Bull the Constructors' Championship. Had he got a few points here and there or a few other better qualifying performances throughout the year, I think Red Bull would be the clear leaders in the Constructors' Championship, but hey, things are what they are. Lewis Hamilton in the qualifying, P10. It was quite surprising because in free practice 1, free practice 2, seeing the pace of Lewis, it felt like he would be almost pole position, but it was quite surprising to see him down in P10. Obviously, it was down to his mistake. I think he had a slight oversteer in one of the corners in qualifying, in the last run especially, so I think it kind of ruined his qualifying. We got to see the best of him in the race, but hey, I think he missed a chance to win the race, but George totally deserved what he did yesterday. And Colapinto having that big crash. Thankfully, he's really okay. But I think when they were trying to show the reviews, you see how he crashed into the wall towards the left, and then his car almost went airbound when he hit the barrier on the right again. So it was a pretty huge crash. You got a feel for the Williams mechanics at this point. I mean, they have had to rebuild cars after cars since Brazil, and now again. It has been a huge reconstruction bill, I would say, for them for the last couple of races. And thankfully, Colapinto is okay and he was able to race. Now, coming to the race. One thing we can definitely discuss is the first lap shenanigans. I mean, a huge shout out to all the drivers, because throughout the race, none of them really crashed into each other, and many a time we had very close calls. Drivers were going side by side through corners where I would believe only one car could come out of it, but none of them had any crashes. No one was, I think, even lost a front wing or a part of the front wing. Everyone was racing clean and perfectly, so huge props to them. And coming to lap 1, one thing I was quite surprised is Charles Leclerc. All the way from P4, he just comes all the way to P2, and almost he was about to take George Russell as well in the first initial few laps. And also, not to forget, the huge props to Liam Lawson and Kevin Magnussen, because in the first couple of laps, throughout many corners, they were just going side by side, none of them backing down, none of them making a mistake, and they didn't even crash into each other or the wall. So huge props, because we had a lot of fun watching what they did, and it was quite amazing to see the best drivers going side by side through all these fast and tight corners. It was quite amazing. And in the first few laps, we had Charles Leclerc almost go to P1 by overtaking George Russell, but I think he used up his tires so much that he ended up losing his race pace. The tires were dropping off. He really got behind in the positions, and yeah, thereby he almost lost a chance of winning the race, but he did the best he could. I think he used up a little bit too much of his tires in the beginning of the race. The next part will be Mercedes Masterclass. I mean, who would have expected Mercedes to be finishing a 1-2 after the last few races they have been having? I think since the summer break, Mercedes really didn't show that much pace until yesterday. No one, in fact, even Mercedes, didn't have a clue why they were so quick. George Russell not make a mistake in qualifying, got P1, didn't put a foot wrong throughout the race. thereby winning the race. A totally deserved win for George Russell. And Lewis Hamilton showed us a masterclass of race pace and overtaking. Especially, I think, one of his overtakes with Hulkenberg, where he got around the inside of turn 1 and overtook him by the outside of turn 2. It was quite exceptional performance by both the Mercedes drivers. They didn't know why their car was so quick, but I think that's the best thing we have this year. I don't remember the last time when we had 4 different teams score 1-2s across the season. So it's been quite an amazing constructors battle and different teams really coming forward to show who can perform better. So that is quite exceptional, and Mercedes have done a masterclass in Vegas. Let's see what they can do in the next couple of races. And coming to masterclass, can we say Maxterclass for Max Verstappen? I mean, a huge congratulations to Max Verstappen for winning his 4th world title. In this race, I think he was particularly very calm, kept his cool. He knew which battles to pick, which battles to leave out, because his aim was stuck at winning the World Championship this weekend as early as possible, and he did it in a faultless manner. There were a couple of places where I thought he would be defending more, whether it's against the Ferraris or against Lewis, but he kept his cool. He was like, I got to win the World Championship today, and he did the best he could in the Las Vegas Grand Prix. Huge props to Max for winning the title. And before we get on to the final point, I'd like to just point out that, as said previously, none of the drivers really crashed into each other. It was such a tight, twisty circuit. At many a time I felt that they might crash into each other or might crash into the wall, but everyone kept their calm, they kept their cool. They drove perfectly well, like the best drivers in the world, like they are. And yeah, thankfully everyone was okay. And especially to point out, at one point I was like, none of these cars are going to come out perfectly. You know which ones? Well, it's the Perez, Lawson, Magnussen. Lawson was trying to defend against Magnussen, and Perez just dives down the inside and he takes both the car at once. It was an amazing piece of racing to watch, and thankfully all the 3 cars came out of the corner perfectly. Well, nonetheless, Perez finished P10, still behind Yuki Tsunoda, but one of his better overtakes is what we have seen from Perez previously. Reminded me of Perez from 2020 Bahrain outer circuit. It was quite an exceptional piece of overtaking he did in one of the corners, I should say. Nonetheless, he finished P10, and we would need better performances from Perez if Red Bull were to win the Constructors' Championship. And finally, guys, to talk about the Ferrari shenanigans. I mean, they were all over the place. Both the cars, they had a very good pace. They were right next to Mercedes throughout the weekend. But for some reason, Charles and Carlos, they were always right next to each other, whether it's in pace, whether it's in the starting of the Grand Prix, then Charles losing out his tires and Sainz getting to overtake, and even I think Ferrari, they swapped positions a couple of times throughout the race. I mean, which they can do, but it seemed more like a hot mess because it was not prioritizing one driver over the other. Both really good, so they didn't know what to do with the situation they were in, and they didn't have any competitors. But they knew they couldn't catch Mercedes. There was no one from behind who can come and catch them, whether it's Max or Lando. So they were in the race of their own, and both their drivers. One point I think all of us which observed, but Charles Leclerc really getting mad with the team, because he was pretty upset that Carlos Sainz, when he was asked to hold back, because Leclerc had cold tires but much more new ones, so they wanted Leclerc to be ahead of Sainz so he can go and at least try to go behind the Mercedes. But Carlos Sainz was like, nope, I'm doing my own thing, and he just overtakes Charles Leclerc, and this really pissed off Leclerc. Well, I think in perspective, in back then, one thing which came out to my mind was he's a driver that's leaving Ferrari by the end of this year. So he just has 3 more races in one of the most historical and mythical teams on the grid. Why not go ahead and get a podium with them? Why would anyone leave a chance of getting a podium with such a team? Even if it was Charles in Carlos's shoes, he would have done the same. So I think he was a bit unhappy that he didn't get the podium, but ultimately nothing wrong was done by Carlos. He did what any driver would, and yeah, with this, Ferrari are very, very close to McLaren in the Constructors' World title. Can't wait for the last couple of races to see who can actually come off on top, because it would be quite a battle in the last two races to see which team really is the best in Constructors. I mean, it would be very exciting and happy if Ferrari does it, but hey, it's quite a bit to catch, and we don't know, because in 2024, guys, as you see, every team has been having a different pace for different races. All the teams, you can never say that okay, this team will be the fastest going into the race. You gotta watch the free practice only then to decide, okay, maybe it's McLaren, maybe it's Mercedes this weekend, or Ferrari, or Red Bull at times. So let's see who can actually be on top at the end of the season. Very eager to wait, and it has been an exceptional 2024 so far. Let's hope it finishes off on a high. See you guys.